ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone today. This is our first panel, Criminal Justice, Safety, Military Science, Diversity, and Inclusion for careers. We're going to try, our goal is to do this on a more regular basis. This is our first one. They'll not all be about career oriented, but they will all be dealing with diversity and inclusion issues for public safety. I think everybody exactly this is why we start with careers and policy. I think it's a good time to talk about it right now. Spring comes and holiday season is. It's also graduation time and time to get jobs. We had our career fair really good a couple weeks ago. And it's not, hey, you if you're not graduating now, to be thinking about careers. And we talk about careers. For many people, the diversity and inclusion issues within starting or having a career will start that out of a job. But moving forward, and a good thing to kind of understand is other people's experiences. You can understand how other people have traversed the career before in terms of getting jobs and having careers in various public safety settings. And so what we've done today is we've got three different panelists from three different areas. They're going to talk about their experiences and what we are going to do. The plan is to start off with a little bit of discussion about them. They're going to I'll read off there because not maybe this. I'm going to read off their little bio. We'll call it that. And not been fact checked. So we're going to read off their bios and then we'll start off with a couple questions and we'll hopefully then we'll do two questions you have. Questions. There's things you want to ask them and talk about. Please, they are extremely personal, lots of experience, very experienced, and just really their people are very excited. Having a lot of fun. I have fun. I don't know today. But we'll start off with the order. The current IG has been with Lexington Fire Department for 22 years. Currently serves as the executive officer in fire education development. She is a paramedic, hazardous materials technician, fire instructor, and aircraft rescue firefighter. He started time with the present fire department primarily spent on the fire line, but she also served at fire training camp. PC Roberts is a PKU alumna, graduated in December of 1999 with an associate in emergency medical care and a bachelor's in fire protection and administration. She has worked for all years outside of work and is a pilot meeting for the Kentucky United Pilots and Parole. William Sweat, is currently employed as a probation parole officer to officer of the Department of Division Probation Parole. He native originally Kentucky. Mr. Sweat earned a bachelor of science in corrections and juvenile justice services from EKU. He has over 20 years of experience in the areas of security policy, treatment management, facility administration, and community intervention in Kentucky, Oklahoma. And Mr. Sweat, playing for EKU football colonels, preparing him for being the best that he can be and working as a team player. That's also a great story here how he signed with hold on. And then last but not least, Cory Buckner, for almost 3 decades. Sorry, and now Cory Buckner. For almost 3 decades, Cory has been involved in public safety of some sort, starting as a volunteer firefighter and police explorer at the age of 16, working his way up to being a state trooper before finally settling in as a paramedic with the Nashville Fire Department in Nashville, Tennessee. He has worked as a paramedic with a rural service in Logan County, Kentucky, a busy metropolitan service with Louisville Metro, and also as a shipboard paramedic with Princess Cruise Line. Currently works as a critical care paramedic with the Nashville Fire Department and Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Middle Tennessee's only level 1 trauma center. In his time away from the lights and sirens, he enjoys traveling, outdoor activities, sporting. The area's first therapy dog program, which is actually a very good story you should ask him about, for first responders and healthcare workers. So now we get on a little bit on their formal files. What I'd like you to do is to give us a look about how they ended up in their current career, and more importantly, why did they end up in their career? What brought them to fire service, PNC, police? So we start with
Like corrections, getting corrections that was out when I was kind of, I really chose being certified of account, but that was more money we had. But then, through the course of playing ball and doing my account, Cory, I met Dr. Fox, who was a professor here this past. And he was taking kids to down the Kentucky institutions and asked me if I'd go along. And I thought it was kind of unique because I was still in crutches, on crutches. And I told him, yeah, I'd go along. And I went down to the institution with Dr. Fox and toured the facility, and then got to talking to Dr. Fox. And the next day, I changed my major to corrections. So that's how I got my degree here at Eastern. And after that, then going to work for different agencies, as you heard, let me know that it was just not a job, but it's a career. After you do something for so long, it's no longer a job, and you get passionate in it, and it turns into a career for you. So that's how.
Maria, you want to talk a little about yourself? How you got into fire?
How I got into fire. So I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. My father was a volunteer firefighter, so I grew up around the fire station. The deal was when the truck rolled out, the bay had to be swept. And so when I was old enough to push a broom, that was my job. So when I turned 16, I joined that volunteer fire department and knew that was the direction I wanted to go. I wanted to be a firefighter. I wanted to be a paramedic because up north, everything is cross-trained dual role, fire EMS, except for like the city of Chicago. So mom said I had to go to college. That was kind of the first step of, I was told that was not an option. So did some research, found EKU and came down here and just found, the ability to get both degrees, to learn about both jobs. I interned or co-opted with Richmond Fire Department, worked part-time with Madison County EMS, really had an opportunity to jump in with both feet on this career path and confirmed that was what I wanted to do. While I was here, I had some instructors that were Lexington officers, had some friends that were trying to get on Lexington, had gotten on Lexington and said, man, it seems like the place to be. So during my last semester here at Eastern, I applied and started the academy about a month and a half before I graduated. So I started with Lexington in November of '99 and haven't looked back.
All right, Cory.
So I started 16 as a volunteer firefighter. My dad was actually a state trooper in Kentucky, and for the longest, that's what I thought I wanted to do. What's cooler than getting out of a gray car with that campaign hat on the side of the interstate, writing a traffic ticket, or investigating a wreck, or driving 120 miles per hour to get somewhere because you can. And then I realized that people shoot at state troopers, and that just was not something I was interested in. So I decided I would be the guy that would show up and pick up the people that were shot. And so I switched to medicine and been a paramedic ever since. It's probably one of the best careers I've ever had, and the career path to get here allowed me to see both sides of, well, actually all three sides of public safety. And it's made it a very enjoyable career. So long story short, I don't like getting shot at. I'd rather pick up people with bullet holes, and that's why I'm here.
Yes, I'll leave a ringing endorsement for the state.
Don't get shot at kids.
So as we move more towards talking about kind of the topic of the day, diversity and inclusion in your career, if we can get each of you to speak about how shared experience along those lines of how diversity, equity, and inclusion has impacted your career either positively or negatively. So this time let's start with Cory.
So going back to the state police, one of the mantras of the state police is, my color is gray, my gender is trooper. And that is what from day one of the academy, we encourage and we make sure every trooper that graduates understands that there is no black, white, or any other color when it comes to dealing with people. And there is no gender difference when it deals with a victim of a crime or a suspect. And the state police take a very proactive approach in their diversity and inclusion. They realize that filling the roles of a state trooper is difficult, especially if you're trying to fill a role in a county that has 2% minority population in Eastern Kentucky. So it's a very specific thing that they look to do. And one of the things that they harp on and that we really pushed on new troopers who may not have had the exposure was to make sure that when dealing with somebody of a different color, different nationality, or religion, or sexual orientation, it didn't matter. They were still sir or ma'am, and you treated them with the same amount of respect that you would give to everybody. And that was something that carried over to the frontline troops all the way up to the commissioner. So that was my first job where there was a very specific point to where gender diversity and inclusion was pushed so that everybody was on the same page. If that makes sense.
That's all. Is that different sexually than working in EMC? And you had the benefit of working in multiple different
I have.
jurisdictions.
For the state police, it has to be intentional, especially in today's climate. You're not going to get the benefit of the doubt if a word is interpreted differently. And so it has to be more intentional and more forceful, if you will, to get that across. Not because you expect your troopers to treat somebody differently, but they're going to treat more people on an average daily basis than I will working on an annual. They're going to have more citizen contacts than I would in a week. And so you have to be more intentional with your diversity and inclusion as opposed to on the EMS side, simply because there's more to go wrong in the line of police work when dealing with people as opposed to emergency medical care. And so the state police made it a point to make sure that every trooper that graduated understood that discrimination of any sort would not be tolerated from day one all the way up to the end of their career. And that was one of the good things about the state police is they were very intentional in the way they approached gender equality and inclusion.
Cory, how has your experiences been in terms of diversity and inclusion from in the fire service?
So going into the job, I really thought that my biggest obstacle when it came to diversity, equity, and inclusion would be my coworkers, right? There were 3 women in my recruit class. When you looked at how many women had ever been on the Lexington Fire Department, we were 9, 10, and 11. Ever. So I really thought the battle was going to be winning over my coworkers. I thought the battle or the issues were going to come from the people that I work with. And that wasn't the case. There's here and there, right? There's anywhere you go, you're going to have smaller issues. The biggest thing that impacted me that really came out of left field for me was when I first got promoted. And, I'm the lieutenant and I'm in charge and even on the captain. And we'd get on scene and the person, the citizen that we're interacting with would come up and immediately start speaking to one of my firefighters. Because, the girl is not going to be in charge, right? It's one of the guys that are going to be in charge. And it was one of those things that you start noticing it, and you're like, wait, this isn't at all where I expected the issue to be. And it's because, right, we haven't been in those positions long. And so the general public just isn't seeing that. One of the most impactful experiences I had was I'd gone to a new assignment. It was a weird way that I got the assignment. The senior man was not happy that I was there. Didn't feel like we would even be able to get along. And within about 2 months, he came to me and he's like, I had no idea how different your experience is on this job compared to mine. He's like, I keep watching people walk up and talk to me instead of you, even though you're the one in charge. He's like, I would have never, ever guessed that. And I don't know how you're gonna stay mad all day about it. And I'm like, well, you know, I could get mad, or I can just redirect the situation when it's appropriate. Because otherwise I'd be mad every day that I was at work. And he was like, well, it's not an issue anymore. Because, you know, he was one of those senior firefighters that had already taken both crews in the station and sat them down and said, this isn't gonna happen anymore. If somebody comes up and talks to you instead of the captain, you immediately redirect them. Doesn't matter if you know the answer. Doesn't matter if you can answer the question without walking over the truck and getting the captain. You redirect. And that was amazing because I never dreamed that anybody else saw that it was going on. It was just something I knew was going on. So to have somebody who had started out really unsure that we would even, hey, I respect your rank, but I'm going to do what you say because of your rank, but I don't know how this is going to go. To make that kind of a turnaround was really impactful for me because, like I said, when I first got promoted, I was not at all expecting that that's where my biggest issue was going to be. I work with great people. There's one thing about the fire department is when you show them you can do the job, that's all most people care about. Be there, be able to do your job, have your brother or sister's back. Like those are the important things. So once I could do that, getting along with everybody was fine. But it was totally took me out of left field that the public wouldn't see me as somebody that would be making decisions or that they could trust to make a decision.
I say the biggest impact in my career was, like Real saying, it wasn't working with my peers that was on the same level. But it was when I got promoted to chief of security of a 3,300 bed female prison at the time in Oklahoma, which was the largest facility in the company that I worked with. I worked with a private company. I worked for a private company out of Sarasota, Florida. And then once a month, they would have chief of security meetings where all the chiefs of all the facilities would come in from around the world. Because the company that I worked for had prisons in Australia and England and all through the United States. So we had a meeting in Sarasota, Florida, and I flew into that meeting and walked into the meeting and all the air left the room. And it was like, okay, I see I'm the elephant in the room. Because when I looked around the room, it was like watching the Stafford husbands. It was all cookie cutters. And I'm looking at like, okay, I'm the only minority in the whole room out of 40 security chiefs. And so I'm sitting in the room and we're going through the meeting and they're asking questions of the other chiefs and come around to me and they skip over me and ask questions to another chief. And this keeps going on for a while. And so I finally get up and I go over to the board and I just start writing numbers down on the board. And finally, the vice president of the company, he says, what are you doing? I said, so since y'all don't want to talk to me, these are my numbers for our facilities. 0 incidents on staff, 0 incidents on offenders, inmates, no escapes. Here's my budget. I saved $1.2 million in the budget. I said, so I just want to get that out there before I leave. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, no, you have no interest of wanting to talk to me. I said, the problem is this room. Because at this point, you got to take a stance in your career as far as what's right and what's wrong. My dad always told me, never compromise your integrity for a wrong situation. And I told him, I said that we have to do something to balance out this room. I said, that mentality of saying, well, this is the way it is, or that's the way it's always gonna be, is have to stop. Because you have minorities that can bring a lot to this company that you're just passing over. And after that meeting, me and the vice president sat out, and then that's when he said, well, we have to start doing something for the company. He said, we're gonna look at diversity and want your input into it. I said, well, unless we do action, what is good is input. We can sit here and talk about it all day. And if you don't put what we talk about in action, then what's the use? We're just giving rhetoric out and satisfying a policy because now I done brought an issue to the company that they have to address, that they can't. You can't get rid of me because I'm at this position now, and I'm chief of your largest facility. I said, so you're gonna keep hearing it until we put it in action. That let me know at that point that we have to do something about pertaining to that company as far as diversity and inclusion. And then I went back to my facility and I started doing that. I promoted more minorities, more women. And I'm telling you, it makes the environment a whole lot better. It makes the facility run a whole lot better. But you have to take a stance. These are the perfect times when you're going into your career that you have the opportunities and you have the mechanisms to actually take a stance and look at your agency and look at how you can make your agency better.
Thank you, sir. Building off that, in your field, and we've got three, let's say 3.5, doesn't like to be shot at anymore. But how do you feel these different fields view diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I'm going to kind of tie this back, but I'm sure there are still challenges involved. We'll kind of talk a little bit more specifically about that. But what do you feel like the climate is right now with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion within these fields generally? And then has it changed in your time in these all been in there? Are you 20 years plus? Has it changed and in what way? So we'll start, Maria gets to start this time. But from let's say from a fire perspective, what do you think the climate is within firefighting with regards to diversity and inclusion? And how do you feel it's changed started 22 years ago?
I would, right, you can't brush with too broad of strokes for everywhere. In my experiences over the last 30 years, I've seen a very big change. And part of that's just understanding that when you're talking about diversity, right, we immediately go to race, gender, religion, but it's also diversity of thought and it's diversity of experience that people who may not look like the prototypical firefighter can bring to the table. The more that we can build a department that looks like the community that we serve, the more comfortable people are going to be with us, and the more they're going to think that maybe this is a career for me. We've got 23 sworn female firefighters on the job now. So when I came on, we were 9, 10, and 11. So in 22 years, we've a little over doubled. We're sitting at 4% right now, which is the national average for career firefighters. But the road for any minority coming on right now is a very different road than the one that I went. Like I said, you're still going to have pockets wherever you go. But for the most part, I think the appreciation and understanding for diversity and inclusion is a lot better. And part of that too, as much as like those of us of this generation like to talk maybe not so positively about millennials and not so positively about Gen Z, we have some struggles. Those two generations are global generations, right? They're people who've grown up on the internet, who have seen and experienced things and interacted with people, even if it's online, but it's reacting with or interacting with people that I didn't interact with growing up. So, so as much as sometimes we struggle with work ethic, values of time and those sorts of things with the younger generations, and like, it's hard sometimes because I wish I could be that. It's not how I was raised, but I said, there's a more global interaction for the younger generations that are coming up. There's also way more in their everyday lives that deals with and talks about diversity and inclusion. So as our departments get younger, they're more open, they're more understanding. They have a perspective that I didn't grow up with. So part of it is the dinosaurs, you know, recognizing and seeing and learning. And part of it is that our younger generations are just raised with more awareness about it and raised to appreciate individuality and raised to appreciate different perspectives and how they can apply to the job and how they can apply to helping different people within the community. So I definitely think we're headed in the right direction. And I really give a lot of that to the younger generations coming up. Because, right, we all know it's hard to change those of us who've been around for 20 years. So I really do give a lot of credit to a lot of the change to that. And they're coming in with different personalities and they're coming in with different thoughts and perspectives. If we can, you know, bias isn't just about gender, race, all those things. It's the lens that we look at people through, right? So it's really easy for me to put up that Gen Z or that millennial lens and choose to see the things that I see in that generation as not me. But if I can take that lens down and listen to what people are saying and listen to their perspective, then that's going to help us get better throughout with everybody in the department.
From a correction standpoint, how do you feel correction as far as the work?
It's changed greatly from, and that's one thing that we can't ever forget is the history of where we started from and where we at now and where we plan on going. Because we forget about the history of the bad incidents when it was the good old boys club, when we'd hire minorities to do the janitorial, to sit in corrections, to sit on the housing units, that they were never good enough to be in an officer, a sergeant, lieutenant, a captain, or chief, or even a warden. So we cannot never forget about where we came from. If we do, then we're going to tend to repeat history again. But from starting out where I started out to where I am today, the field of corrections improved greatly. We have more women in places. We have a lot of minorities that have gotten up into the administration, who's been up to supervisors. But like Maria said, it's still that mentality that is still there. That, okay, we're doing the diversity thing, we're doing the training, we add in, but it's like, okay, well, we need to do more. We need to lay the plan for the next generation. And that's where y'all come into it. You know, when I was sitting out here, you talk about the internet, it was like, the internet was us hollering from one floor to another. Y'all got the internet, cell phones, y'all making it more aware for us that have been preaching that we need diversity, and then y'all putting it out globally, like Maria said. Y'all are the ones that are bringing this to the forefront. When things are not going right in the public, you can easily find it on the internet, Google, and what's some of them, MySpace, and What's some of them other ones y'all
I'm not
know?
helping you.
I know you don't know, I don't, they know out there. But whatever y'all see, I'm old.
We're just gonna let you.
But you know, y'all got the technology, but at the same time, y'all have a new responsibility. That once you're bringing it out, you got to continue to build on it. Cause someday I'm gonna retire, I'm gonna give this all up. And then the new batch, the new kids that's coming in is gonna have to pick up the mantle. That's one of the things that I'm a field training officer for my department. And that's one thing that I enjoy the most here lately is because every new person that comes in, I actually get to train them. I actually get to set them on the road to being the next director or commissioner. So I get to put my influence on. At the same time, I get to say, okay, this one ain't gonna work. But it's more working than not because of y'all's attitude where you have reached out to a global. Y'all have opened yourselves up to more different races, more different sexes. Y'all have opened yourselves up to where all of a sudden you don't see color, you just see the person. Where in my time, they saw that, oh, this is a black man. And no, we don't want him in administration. We don't want him here. We want him to do this because he's gonna do that, but we don't want him up here with us. Where now y'all have opened up. Like I said, where we started out in corrections in the beginning to where we are now is not even the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg will be reached by the young people that are sitting right here. Y'all the ones that's gonna push it to the limit. Y'all the ones that's gonna make diversity and inclusion. Where some that said this was a problem that we had in 2022. We now and whatever is, we don't have that issue because we don't see color. We don't see gender. And that's one thing I always talked about is when you fill out applications, why do we have to mark on there if I'm black, white, third generation Italian as I am? Why do you have to put that on there? What difference does that make? Am I the best person for the job? So that's what.
Hey, Cory, from a person medicine and how has it changed for you? Again, what kind of culture you see there? And again, having had experiences in Louisville and Nashville and in a rural setting.
I think that the biggest difference now is this generation is just, they're not accepting the status quo. The dogma that, you can never ask why, is something they're just not accepting, and I absolutely love it for it. On the EMS side for the years, you would say, we've always done it this way. Those who are stepping into the career now are not accepting that. And that's causing them to become better providers. When you carry that over to hiring standards, if they see that there's inequality or racial discrimination, they're calling it out. Whereas before we'd go home and tell either our significant others or a family member about it. The new group that is coming down the pipe now, they're calling it out as soon as they see it. And that's making the workplace a lot better. Not necessarily on the standpoint from where you deal with it at work, but in the patients you deal with. My partner is years younger than I am at work. And the most she gets fired up about is when somebody begins to use racial terms. And she will not tolerate it. And even more so, me as a black guy, I'm even afraid for that person when she gets angry. And she's 5'5", 28-year-old white girl, and will come to my defense faster than I could ever think about. The new groups that are coming through the line of public safety are far more stronger than we are, far more vocal, and they're a lot quicker to recognize injustices of any sort. And they're simply not putting up with it. And 20 years ago, that would be unheard of. You could make a joke in a break room or at a firehouse table, and people would laugh at it, no matter how inappropriate it is. New groups coming out, they're not putting up with it. They are inclusive. They refuse to discriminate based on anything, skin color, sexual orientation, religious oriented, and they're making it known. They're going to make our careers as a whole a lot better because.
So as you talk about changes, overall in the career, what you've seen, how are things changing in terms of what the agencies you work for, in terms of how they prepare people to move up? So it's one thing, and I think we'll get to some questions about recruiting suggestions you have for those going into these fields, but you really want to have the career. What are your all's agencies? What are some of those things that are working well, or are they doing anything in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, in terms of helping to launch the next generation of supervisors from a diverse, inclusive standpoint? Are there things that are in place in your all's agency or other agencies that you've seen that seem to be working or don't work, or is it just not? So I'll let anyone who wants to jump into that one first. Everybody taking that first.
I think that for us in Nashville, we recognize that there's a little bit of a disparity in our workforce versus our population we serve. And I think that's the first step, is recognizing that there's a little bit of your population that you serve does not necessarily meet the population that you have working for you. And that is the first step that any agency has to make. And then from there, you have to make very intentional steps. You have to look for ways to bring up those employees that fall into a group that's not represented in the command staff. We've done a good job on the suppression side in Nashville as far as representation goes, but on the EMS side, we just don't have the diversity in our frontline ranks to where we can be as diverse as we are on the fire side. Recognizing that is the first step, and then going forward, you make it conscious effort to recruit from areas that you don't normally recruit from. You go to the high schools that you may respond for calls for service, but you don't have the reach that you would normally have, say, the police department does. So one of the things that we set up was a Blaze mentoring program, where we send fire crews out to the high school to talk to them. So our seniors have an idea of what to expect in the real world, while also being able to be exposed to what it's like working for the fire department. And that's actually made, it's generated a lot of interest in recruitment. And it's in its infant stages, so we're not really seeing a return on it yet, but that's something we're tracking to see if it's going to benefit the department and the community as a whole.
Well, with my agency, when I worked for Probation and Parole, one of the things we set up was the field training officer position. And that was so that we could get new staff properly trained, understand exactly what the job entails, looking at responsibilities and going through, making sure policies are understood is one of the things that Probation and Parole established for that. But one of the things that we really lack at is the recruitment of minorities. That we have talked about this before we started over lunch, is that there's where my agency, I feel that we're lacking at is the recruitment. Coming out to the universities, trying to recruit minorities into probation and parole. It's almost like one of those secret hidden professions that nobody wants you to know about except by word of mouth, and not want to advertise and say, hey, here we are. You know, like we was talking about that, you know, it's an agency that doesn't strike, doesn't lay off, retirement's good, pay is good, but there's not a lot of recruitment, and I feel like our department can improve a whole lot better by recruiting, putting ourselves out there so that we can recruit minorities to come in, because like he was saying that, you know, our department should reflect our communities. And that's what I always keep preaching all the time. We should reflect our communities. And, you know, right now in my office, there's 2 minorities out of 50 officers in my office. That's not a reflection of our community. So what we need is for this young group right now is about to graduate to get interested in probation and parole. Look up probation and parole. It's a state job. I'm actively recruiting for you to apply. You know my name. You can contact me and let me know you applied, and I'll forward it up the chain. And I'll make waves, because I ain't have no problem with that. I done worked this so long that they can't get rid of me. I'm a fixture. So, but yeah, that's where we need to improve in our agency is with recruitment.
So when you're talking about training for supervisors, that gets into leadership. But all of that starts kind of with training everybody, right? Talking about it and having those conversations throughout the organization. If you look at Lexington Fire Department over the last 10 years, you could call that fragmented at best. It's a lot of city push, diversity classes, HR classes. A lot of those didn't go very well. You know, firefighters, they can be pretty crass sometimes. I know them. So a couple years ago, we started working with Dr. Cleveland, Roger Cleveland, that used to be here in KU, and Emily Duncan, and we started a 3-year program that was a Culture of Courage program. And that didn't just look at culture or diversity based on the hot topic buttons you would think, but it really got into understanding bias, understanding implicit bias, understanding the lenses that we see people through. You know, if somebody comes on and it's just a dud their first year, then it has nothing to do with race, gender, religion, sexual orientation. If it's in your brain that they're a dud, then every time you watch them, you're looking for those cues that tell you they're a dud. And then you go, oh, yeah, see, total dud, right? It's confirmation bias, right? Because we're looking for it and we're looking for it. And as soon as we see it, yep. You know, if your supervisor thinks everything that's going to come out of your mouth is negative, then they will never hear a positive word out of your mouth. It doesn't matter what you say. But those are just lenses, right? And they're not always based in fact, and they're not always based on just one thing or the other. So culture of courage, we really talked about identifying lenses, and we talked about trauma because we deal with a lot of trauma on this job, and we come back from runs and we don't understand that our brain is still operating like from this primal space, right? And so we're just reacting, and somebody may think, she really hates me. She's not. Like, what's up with her? Well, it's because I'm not using my frontal cortex. I'm not thinking. I'm reacting out of a place of, essentially, when you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with fear, right? So it's not that I don't like you. It's not that I'm being short with you because of XYZ reason that you want to place on it. It's that my brain still isn't working the way it normally does. So sometimes those things get intermingled. But so this was a 3-year program. We did a lot of train the trainers. We had some good classes. We got about 2 years into it. We had committees. We were really going in a great direction. And then can anybody guess what happened? COVID, right? So COVID happened, and that stopped a lot of things. We do a company officer academy, and that trains our first line supervisors. In the past, we've kind of addressed it in roundabout ways. We talked about leadership and your responsibilities as a leader to stop things when you hear them, to address issues when you see them. If somebody reports something to you, your legal responsibilities, your moral, ethical responsibilities as the leader in the room to address those. But did we really talk about being advocates for understanding, being advocates for unifying people? And we haven't done as good a job on that. And I was literally sitting with Chief Wells going through some of these questions, and the question about leaders came up. And he and I and one of the other assistant chiefs who started the Company Officer Academy years ago were like, I probably need to do some work on that. How do we missed that one. But I'm really lucky because Chief Wells is like one of the tenets of his administration is a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's currently sitting on a committee with the IAFC, International Association of Fire Chiefs, where they're developing a training program to be sent out nationwide for the fire service. We're actually just, I guess today was the first, we're doing a pilot program of that training to give feedback. So he talks about it a lot. It is on his radar. I would be a little worried about the fact that I got put in my position just because of my gender, if I didn't know him well enough and we hadn't worked together so much. Like, it's on his mind. He doesn't want us to not move forward. So it's important to him, which makes it important for the department. So my guess is we'll see a little bit better leadership training in that direction. But we're also starting to, what had kind of been that culture of courage, some of those committees, the IFF, the International Association of Firefighters, has what's called a Human Relations Committee, and it helps to address a lot of those same issues from both a labor and management standpoint. It's a committee that involves everybody on that front. So as we've gotten through collective bargaining and all that kind of stuff, that committee, we're looking to get started, and hopefully that should help some of those things as well.
You said something kind of caught my attention, which is about how the changes start within the organization. Sometimes it's something online, like some of it's led by the city, some of it's been led by the agency. And I'm curious if your all experiences, how have those changes taken place? Sounds like changes take place from when you started, but has it mostly been implemented on the agency, or has it come from within the agency? And have you noticed resistance from some of the other folks within that work with you in these agencies? Have they been kind of diversity? Here's the diversity training. They've been hesitant, so they've been pushed back, training, and has that possibly come because it's more of a city implementation than a
Yes. Definitely. Like this. So the city, like, diversity classes are, we had a woman not come back after the first day. And we had guys on the job that were proud of that. Showed her. No. So like that, when it's pushed down, especially from everybody in the city is going to take this class, it's just less relatable to what you do every day. Because people who go in and work in an office for 8 hours and then go home, they just have to learn to get along for 8 hours. They're not sitting at the kitchen table eating together. They're not sleeping in the same bedroom. They're not working every third day all day long, and you can have a fight and you can be mad, but you still have to sit down at the same table and eat supper. So to try to take a class that's aimed at somebody that works in the cubicle next to you and apply it to the world we live in just doesn't work. So definitely the ones that have come from more of an understanding first of the culture of the job, of the culture of the fire department, and then how does that relate to different cultures within that department. I think that definitely has a better impact. But it's still tough. If you label something diversity, right, everybody's cockles flare up because you're being attacked on what could possibly be assumed are your opinions. Well, they're telling me this because they think I'm racist. No, that's not actually why we're telling you. We're talking about this in a general sense, but people tend to get very, very worried. And when you think you're being attacked, the first thing you do is get defensive and go on the offensive. For me, the thing that I've tried to implement anytime I've gone to a new station, anytime I've gone to a new shift, a new position, whatever it is find that seed of commonality. That seed of commonality can be service, right? It can be us unifying around service. The senior firefighter I talked about that I didn't think we were gonna at all work together well. My youngest son was the same age as his grandson. So we found that seed of commonality. And instead of immediately looking at all the differences, we started by finding the things we had in common. And as we developed a relationship with those, as we developed an ability to have conversations around the things we had in common, then the differences came up. And they were more easily talked about because we had already established a relationship. I love celebrating diversity, whether it's in thought or anything. But if you always start out by throwing what's different as the first thing we talk about, then you lose that initial bridge building of finding out what we have the same. And finding out what we have the same is so much more important if you want that relationship to last and grow and actually learn about each other, right? Once we find that thing we can talk about, then we can start talking about other things. And then we learn about each other without it only being about how we're different. But we learn to embrace those differences because we've already learned to embrace the person. So that's always been my modus operandi. You find what we have in common and start that relationship. Because you can put me in a room full of white women, I'm still going to have to find something that we have in common for us to start having a conversation and to build a relationship. And at the end of the day, all of this comes back to building relationships. And you can't do that unless you find some place to start.
Wait, Cory, have you seen much resistance to these sort of things that have been more of a leadership-led or agency-led kind of?
As a black guy, there's nothing worse for anything than diversity training. And the reason why I say that is it's everybody on pins and needles. The mandatory HR diversity training is not near as bad as the forced diversity training. Because if you have to go through the forced diversity training, somebody has done something wrong. And it makes the reception of that training almost unbearable for everybody. And it'll take friendships that you've had for years and years and years and make them suddenly uncomfortable to be the way that they've always been with you, even if it's not discriminatory. So the approach that a lot of places are learning to take with diversity is open conversations. Like the days of Betty Sue, the HR manager, getting up in front and telling a group of people what's wrong with their diversity is long gone. And the only way that going forward that I see diversity training being approachable and acceptable is just through open conversation. Because nothing will alienate a minority from a department more than making everybody in that department go through diversity training on how that minority isn't different from anybody else. It's not fair. It's the old way of doing things. And it's how, especially in the fire EMS side, you cause division where there doesn't need to be. And so I think that for us, the diversity training is going forward is only going to be successful if it's through open conversations and not necessarily death by PowerPoint, if that makes sense. And I think that, like I said, the new group of people who are coming up through the ranks realize that early on. They bring with them not as much inherent implicit bias. They have a little bit, but they're more open and receptive to expressing that, talking about it, and understanding why they're wrong, as opposed to digging in their heels and saying, I'm not racist. So I think that diversity training is going to have to change going forward, and it's more necessity than anything else. And the only way it's going to change and be successful, especially with the department that we have in Nashville, is through open conversation and realizing why diversity is important, not necessarily why you may not be as diverse as you think you are.
Kind of touching on one thing you said, we have this, is that true? Okay. This is something we were talking about in the office just the other day, and it struck me when you were talking about, in an effort to not treat somebody differently, you treat them differently. Like when your focus is to say, we're not gonna treat anybody differently, and then you immediately turn around and in whatever policy training, whatever you think you're doing, to try to not treat that person differently, you absolutely treat them differently. And until you actually sit and recognize that and see that, can that start to change? So that's it.
With working for the state, it's mandated. The first position training is mandated. It's something that we do that is planned annually. So we know that annually we're going to be in our training doing diversity. And like I said, that is one of the most awkward times for me sitting in that training. And usually I'm the only black face in the training. It's like, okay. And you get to see people looking and you get to see their reaction to it. And some staff feel like, they have no issue with diversity. Why are we even discussing diversity? But it is an issue. And it's an issue that where we do the training is by PowerPoint, no discussion, and all the discussion that's going on is between staff sitting and whispering like, I'm not even here. What does this matter anyway? Nothing's ever going to change. It's always still going to be the same. But if we still keep those attitudes and that mentality, then nothing ever will change. And what I have seen change with our diversity program is the new officers that come in. Their attitudes towards race, gender, and everything is totally different than a lot of the ones that's been in there sitting in those trainings for 20 years, 30 years, only see it one way and only see one color and think that, well, this group shouldn't be promoted up to the ranks. But there's where it starts. And like I say, until we start having those open and honest conversations and really understanding what everybody's point of view is about diversity and inclusion, we're not going to make the headway that we should make. Because that's the only way we can sit down as individuals and say, okay, well, what is your issue with me? Because usually what happens is you find that they'll tell you their issue, and it's something that is far-fetched. Just like one guy I was talking to, he said, my issue is that black people only like watermelon and fried chicken. I was like, dude, what? He said, yeah, watermelon fried chicken. That's how I associate you with it. You like, I said, one thing, I don't like too much fried chicken, but I do like watermelon. I said, the other thing is that my grandmother, great-grandmother, was a white lady that taught my grandmother, who was a black lady, how to cook fried chicken. And it's pretty good. But I said, those mentalities and those biases carry over. And until we sit out as a people, as individuals, as men and women, and have those open discussions and get those beliefs and biases out of the way, then we can ever get to the point in diversity that we need to be in. Where we need to be at is a society. Now, the new officers come in, they're there. You're more open to different races and genders, and you're there, and it's up to y'all to come in and open those conversations. That's why I like said with my new staff that I'm training at our trainings, because I'll be sitting there, go ahead and ask a question. And they ask a question, like, okay, that starts a whole conversation. Where we have older staff that are not willing to change in their ways and sitting there, it's like, well, why am I here? I don't need this. This ain't no issue.
Yeah, maybe we'll get rain tonight. That would be nice.
Like I said, the longer we get.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Start having trainings that are open discussion. Instead of having just a PowerPoint and running through the PowerPoint and one individual setting up a reading.
So we're about an hour in. What I'm gonna see is if anybody in the audience has a question for our panelists. And I will bring the microphone to you if you have any.
Either ask questions or we're gonna come out and ask you questions.
Yes.
It's your choice.
Don't leave, no.
There's the first two right there.
Anyone have a question? So this is gonna take me, but I'm like, hold on.
Bill Bobby, he used to be a talk show.
So I think you touched on this a little bit with the diversity training, but what are things that well-meaning people do maybe to try to express allyship or solidarity that end up working against efforts to have really genuine inclusion and diversity? What are things that people have tried to do, maybe, again, like well-meaning people to try to make you feel more included that actually made you feel less included?
I think probably one of the biggest things is telling me how much of an ally they are. Like, that's great, wonderful, cool. But then their actions don't reflect it. Anybody can say anything. Like, I gave you like 300 words about how great I was. None of it was true. And everyone believed it. And I know, shocking, I'm sorry. And I think that that's probably the biggest difference that we're starting to see now in public safety is people will say one thing and do another. And the old adage of actions speak louder than words, at least in my career, what I've seen is on 2 different occasions, I can attest to the one person I thought I had the most problems with becoming my biggest ally. Maria kind of touched on the story with the gentleman at the firehouse. That carries over to EMS. The old crusty guy that's been there for 50 years is on more than one occasion been the first person that's come to my defense. Whereas somebody who says they're an ally will be extremely silent at times it pays to be an ally. So that's probably, lip service is only as good as the actions that back it. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of actions that back it.
Full disclosure, I happen to work for the same agency that Chief Roberts does. And married to a female firefighter who works for the same agency that the 2 of us do. My question is that all 3 of you have hit on the openness of conversations and I guess closeness and proximity to it. I'm very proud of my upbringing and how much my parents stressed diversity and inclusion to me. And then I thought I had a really good grasp on it until I was married to one. And I saw her come home after 24-hour shifts and just eyes open. Man, I don't have a clue I don't have a clue what it's like to be in her shoes. I'm very close to her, obviously, I'm married to her, we have those discussions. So how do we cultivate those conversations in an organization with 600 people so that everybody else gets that same closeness? And now it's not the mandated HR training, it's the, I'm having a conversation with Bob or Sally or whoever it is and getting their perspective.
I think the first thing you have to do is start that conversation with one or two people within your, like me, within my district. And then let that conversation build on from 2 people to 4 people. And like a lot of conversations happen over lunch. Like our office will get together and we'll have lunch in our break room. And I think that there's where you can start those conversations at, is right there over lunch, wherever you gather as a group. And you start asking. And that's the hardest thing, because when you ask the question, be prepared for the answer. But at the same time, when you get the answers, have a response, a positive response to their answer. And then you start building on that, like Maria said, you find that commonality between you. Something that you can build that conversation up on, because you'll learn things about your coworkers. You'll learn about their families. So that's how you start that conversation. And once you start that conversation, then you keep that conversation going. You just can't have the conversation on Monday and not have it again until the next month, Monday. Those are conversations that you have to keep having almost every day, every other day, and popping up, and you just keep on building people into that conversation. What you will find when you start talking about diversity and some of the things going on, those ones that don't agree with you won't be a part of the conversation. So the ones that you are conversating with are the ones that see that as, okay, yes, we need to make this change. We see the issue. Man, I didn't see how they was treating you, but now I do. Now that we had this conversation, that ain't right. And the minute that you get the conversation going where they say this is not right, then you're on the right path, because now all of a sudden you've got the support you need from the individuals. And then it's just a matter of building on. And then it gets to a point where your conversations wind up going to your administration and say, look, these are the things that are going on and we need to put a stop to it. Or we need to get more discussion. Because like my office, we have 4 offices in 8 different counties. So we all come together. My office, we're real tight. We have conversations about some of the problems, but we have those conversations. We can open up and see that we can address those issues. And then we talk with our supervisors about those. That, you know, this is what we need. Like I talk to my supervisors all the time about, you know, I'm tired of walking in here and being the only face like mine in here, except if I'm going to the mirror, straighten my tie or something. We need more diversity in here. And that's how it starts. And then all of a sudden my other co-workers, they agree too. They agree like, hey, we need more diversity. But that's how the conversation, you say, to get the conversation started, is somebody has to start the conversation. It's not like it used to be where people would say, okay, I'm not even gonna talk about this because I'm fearful of my job, or I don't want to cause waves. There's so much out there now about diversity and inclusion that you have to start talking about. And the thing of it is your employer has to start hearing you. But the thing of it is, if you're not talking about it, then your employers don't have to listen to it. They ain't got to deal with it. But the minute that you start talking about it and you put it on the forefront, then all of a sudden they got to start doing something about it. They got to start reacting to it, because you're not going to let it die. You just keep on bringing it out. And then the thing of it is husbands and wives that are at home, that when their husbands or their wife brings it home and they're talking about that issue, then you got to be that supporting grace for them to go back to that job. You got to empower them to say, look, if it ain't right, speak up. Because my wife will. I come home and tell her something, she's like, oh, you know, you take that on back there and you speak up, you tell them what's going on. And I do, I don't hold my tongue now, maybe I should, but I don't. But that is the difference. Because I know that I'm gonna be leaving soon, and I'm setting the path for the next generation of employees in probation and parole, for them to feel like they can speak up. Instead of when I came in and I looked to my co-workers about, you know, this issue ain't right, they're like, man, don't call my age, don't stir up the pot. I'm like, but that's what I do. That's what I do. If it ain't right, I don't wanna compromise my integrity when I know that there's a situation that is wrong and I don't speak up for it. Then I'm part of the problem, not part of the solution. So when your wife comes home and she's telling you about it, you be that backboard for her, and you tell her, well, when you get back to work, you find your supervisor and you speak up. You find common employees and y'all talk about the issue.
To piggyback off that, I think you're in a unique position to where you have the dual role of being both the sounding board and, you know, the unnecessary white knight to riding and save the day. And I don't envy you at all in that, because that's not a good place to be. The biggest thing you need to do is validate her feelings that what she's feeling is wrong, and then support her to give her the courage to address it. Firehouses are brutal, absolutely brutal, but they're also the most emotional places that I've ever worked. And the change in the department and what she has to deal with will start with you. Not necessarily with her, but with you more so, because you're going to hear more of it across the board. You're going to hear both sides of it. And the responsibility is going to lay on your shoulders to shut that down as soon as it starts. The good news is that in today's day and time, once you start shutting it down, others are going to start shutting it down. And that's going to carry over. So the long story short, be the best supporter you can, but at the same time, recognize that her battles are your battles. Firehouses are brutal. You're going to have to do a lot of fighting. It's getting better, and I can say that from a national standpoint. Conversations of years ago don't happen anymore. They do happen to an extent, but not to the level that they used to be. So it's getting better. But you're in a predicament where you're going to get it from both sides. But it also sets you up to be able to affect the most change.
So the initial answer is there's no way to create that kind of organic conversation with 600 people. That's the reality, right? But as we get more women on the job, as we get more minorities on the job, there's more opportunity for other people to see the same thing that you're seeing. You know, when my firefighters saw what I was dealing with, they became advocates for me. But they also taught me to be an advocate for me, right? That next assignment I went to, I didn't wait for them to recognize what was going on scenes. I sat down with them and said, hey, so this is going to happen. This is how I need you to deal with it. So it's a two-way, right? So when you're in the station and somebody says something, absolutely, you need to be an advocate for anybody that you think is not being understood at the station, whose experience is not being understood. And that's not just hers, right? That's anybody you work with. So all of us who are aware of different experiences need to be that advocate. And it's those smaller, truly organic, sitting in the firehouse conversations are going to have a way bigger change than, I mean, you know how that went, right? It turned into a complaint session rather than a talking session, rather than an understanding session, right? So trying to facilitate something that big and that important on that scale is very, very, very difficult. It's the smaller conversations. It's the times when you overhear somebody say something and you have that courage to say, you probably don't understand the perspective that he or she is coming from. You don't understand the experiences. So it's those who have learned by working with any of us what our experience is. It's their willingness to not just say they have our backs, but be that advocate for us. But it's also helping to teach me how to be an advocate for me. Because up until the point that he recognized that and said something to me about it, I just dealt with it. Because that was easier, right? Sometimes it's just easier to deal with it and carry it just for me than asking everybody else to help me carry it, right? Because I already have that extra weight. I already have that extra magnifying glass on me. So if I'm now reaching out for help, she's not strong, don't she? That's holy cow. Can she do this job? Right? There's that higher standard that I always think I have to be at, which is not the standard everybody else is at, right? But it's also going to keep me from asking for help. It's going to keep me from asking you to advocate because I don't want to be seen as weak. So it takes conversations. It takes listening. And when people are then willing to be an advocate for each other, then those conversations become more frequent and they become more impactful and more people hear them and more people start to understand. And then maybe they have the courage to come talk to me and say, hey, I heard this story. Can you talk to me about it? And then that develops understanding. But it can't be done. It can't be done in a swipe in 6 weeks of in-service training. It can't be done that way. Because until you sit and talk and feel, then you're not effective, right? You're effective because you 100% feel. And it's hard, right? No, the majority of people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a racist, sexist person today. That's not the mentality that they enter the world with. That's not what they go to work thinking they're going to be. But it's really easy to make an assumption. And then that's how you come off, right? You can make an assumption based on something you've heard, something you've seen, and now that's how you're portraying yourself. And it's not necessarily what's in your heart. Very few of us have that in our heart. But it's easy to make assumptions based on inaccurate information that we've heard over and over, or that we've been raised in. And even if we feel like we've been raised without it, right? There's still an underlying that none of us even know is there, but it's there, right? So honestly, just smaller conversations and being willing to have those and encouraging others to have them, right? Until we're all willing to have the hard conversations, to step in and identify, well, maybe this is going on. That's going to make the biggest difference. But that's all incumbent upon us.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to give one last chance for a question, but I want to get also one last question for all three of them that I have. You might have a question. All right, here's my question for the three of you. Last one right here. What advice do you have as we are getting this algae and graduation and trying to get a job season for those going into new careers, starting at? What advice would you have for them from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint?
First advice I'd give you is whatever company or agency you're going to apply for, to learn the history and background of that agency. Know that agency so that when you do get that interview, you know some of the history, some of the changes that have happened in that agency. then if you get the job, which we hope you do, is that you learn your position. You learn what your responsibilities are. You learn what your supervisor's responsibility are. You learn what the owner's responsibility are. You learn as much as you can about that agency so that you make yourself a valuable commodity to that agency. Once they see that you're a viable commodity, then all of a sudden they'll start investing a lot into you. When you know about that company, then they see you in a totally different mindset. That's one thing that I credit playing football with Eastern at, is that you learned your position, but you also had to know what the guys beside the other 10 guys' positions were, what their responsibilities were. And so I took that into the workforce with me. And that's why when I got where, no matter what facility I was working at, I learned everything about that facility. I learned the history of that facility. I learned what changes was made, what the policies were, what everybody's responsibility was, what time the shifts were, what time the maintenance people came in. And so then also what happens to the warden then when they looking at somebody to fill in position, or because a position was vacant or something, be like, well, Sweat knows what's going on. Let's get him to do it. Place him in an active role. Then all of a sudden I wind up getting promoted. So that would be one of the things, the advice I give to you going into this job. Research the agency that you're going to join. Look at what their diversity issues have been, what they have done for diversity and inclusion. See if they have minorities in administration, if they have women in the administration, how fast women and minorities have been promoted. And then when you sit across from them, then what you'll find out is sometimes you will know more about the company that you're interviewing with than some of the people sitting there with you that actually work for the company. But make sure that when you apply and you decide on the whoever you're going to work for, that you learn as much as you can about that agency before you even go into that interview when you get there.
Were you reading my notes?
No,
That's the very first thing is look at the specific organization applying
I
for
can't even see.
DEI Pro.
Can't even see that far.
Great mind.
A great mind is like a light.
So, going beyond just researching the organization, look out and see if there are any affinity groups within that organization, right? Is there a women's firefighter group? Is there a Black firefighters group? Is there a Latino firefighters group? Is there an affinity group that you can reach out to and say, hey, can you give me the real lowdown? I'm working here. Is this someplace I want to come to work? Is this someplace where you all feel accepted? And is there change in the works? You know, can I come be a part of making the change I want to see? And sometimes if there's not those groups out there, still at least find a mentor. Find somebody who will understand the experience you're having. Because there is not a single guy on the job who can truly understand my experience. They can be empathetic, they can be thoughtful, they can listen, but they can never truly understand what it's like for me when I go to work every day. So if there's not an affinity group, at least find a mentor so that you've got somebody to talk through these things with who can say, yeah, maybe you're being a little hypersensitive, or no, absolutely, I've been there, and here are some ideas on how you can address that. But start with researching the organization. Make sure you're going into an organization where DEI is a priority. And then reach out to folks in that organization and find out their thoughts, because they're going to give you the truth, right? There can be all sorts of diverse pictures on the website and, there can be statements that DEI is important to us, but when you talk to the people who are there, you're gonna get the lowdown. So, don't be afraid to reach out, find people who work there and speak with them when you get on the job. Reach out and find a mentor. It really is one of the best things you can do. If anything, just to keep your sanity and know that you're not the first person this has happened to. But maybe have some tools on how to deal with it.
My advice is don't listen to the old people on panels telling you what to do with your career. Horrible advice. We're the worst judge of characters ever. We've made this situation worse. My advice to everybody, and I tell you the same thing I tell my kids, find your moral compass. Find the things that you are unwaverable on, that you will not sacrifice your upbringing on, and stick with them. Diversity, equality, and inclusion, or something that, or equity and inclusion, or something that your moral compass should never stray from. And if it does, don't be afraid to speak up on it. They've given some very sound advice, but the biggest thing I can tell you is you will eventually find yourself in a situation where your moral compass will be tested. And if you know going into it that these are the things I will not waver on, you will never be wrong in your response. Other than that, take pictures, use your vacation time because you'll never get back, and sit with the weird guy at lunch because he's kind of cool. But yeah, find the groups that you don't know a lot about and learn from them, because that's how you grow. Like, nobody ever grows in darkness, right? Mushrooms grow in darkness. Plants need sunlight, just like we need the wisdom of others to help us grow. So it's a lot of advice for one question. I apologize. I'll bring it down. Don't listen to old people. Sit with the weird dude. Moral compass. But seriously, if I could go back to the beginning of my career, I would not go back to the beginning of my career. But enjoy it. You're about to go through the last 20 years in a blink of an eye. And old people used to tell me that all the time. And it's true. It is absolutely true. So whatever you are unwavering on from your upbringing or from what you've learned through life, don't waver on it. And when you find yourself in that situation, speak up. Don't be afraid to use your loud voice. Sometimes that's what's needed to be heard.
I read it on Reddit. Yeah. I know, yeah, no. I bribed the things.
That vacation part.
Yeah, use your vacation. Use your vacation. Yes.
So, I want to thank everybody for getting a round of applause. Thank you all for your time today. Love hearing from you. Love having lunch. I think everything you guys had to say was really impactful. It really got me thinking. I'll be honest with you. Well, it doesn't just apply to public safety agencies, it also applies to diversity and how we move forward as a company. And so I think these are all very important things to hear and to take home with you and to live out. It's been a great afternoon. It's a little warm up here, I'll be honest with you, it's hot. But again, thank you all to everyone who came. And thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Hey, if anybody, interested in work for Probation or Parole, I got Nashville Fire Department. I got business cards.